Welcome back into the Door Report. It is episode number 44. It is Thursday, October 29th. Welcome back. We are back and better than ever. As always, we are presented by the great folks at Alaco Hardwood Flooring. Hit up Jimmy Alaco and those folks for any hardwood flooring needs you might have. Will, we're back better than ever. We got another episode here. I'm reporting live down in Naples. You are up in Nashville, as always. We'll talk to Jake Evans from the Rebel Walk and the Flagship Football Show. Also, we will send it down to Oxford. He will join the podcast today. Will, it's another week of Vanderbilt football. They haven't played in the past couple weeks, but the vibe is that we got another electric offense coming to town.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It feels like forever since I've sat down and done the podcast with you or sat down during a game week. It feels like we've gone through an entire off season, but you know, you're in the SEC. You got Ole Miss coming in, susceptible defense against our inept offense. Their offense is extremely high powered, and you know Lane Kiffin is always going to bring a lot of unique offensive schemes and energy whenever he comes to town, whatever team he's a part of.
The Lane train rolls into Nashville this weekend. You got a 3:00 kick in Nashville, 4:00 Eastern time. That game is SEC Network, Will. That's that'll be on SEC Network. Ole Miss is a 16.5-point favorite, so we'll see what goes down in Nashville. Before we get to the breaking news, though, don't forget to follow us on Twitter. That's at @door_report and Instagram, door.report. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our podcast is available on Anchor, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Go give our podcast 5 stars and a review as well on iTunes. Will, the all-time series with Ole Miss, they lead 50-40-2, and we talked about it with Jake Evans. You'll hear a little bit of that conversation a little bit later in the podcast, but this has seemed like a little bit of a rivalry, but with the way Ole Miss has dominated Vanderbilt, at least last season, they kind of ran through the Commodores' defense. What's kind of the initial expectations and the feel around this game as we look into Ole Miss and Vandy?
Yeah, so that all-time series is 50-40-2, and obviously last year was not the performance the Commodores wanted at that point in the year. Dominated 31-6, but the last 10 games in the series have actually been split evenly 5-5. So this is kind of a rubber match of sorts. So I think Ole Miss is the tremendously more talented team. I think their staff is more talented, but they do have more spots to exploit than opponents Vanderbilt has had in recent weeks. So their defense is extremely susceptible, giving up a lot of points. But then again, Vanderbilt hasn't even reached 270 total yards of offense in a game this year. And is averaging 8.6 points per game, and that includes a safety the defense got. So it's bad against bad in Vanderbilt's offense versus Ole Miss's defense. So I would kind of put that as a push, but Ole Miss's offense is tremendously better than Vanderbilt's defense, and especially the performances we've seen in the last 2 weeks. I mean, this Ole Miss team put up 48 points against the number one team in the country in Alabama. I know their defense is not the traditional Alabama powerhouse defense, but still 48 points. Vanderbilt hasn't reached that point total in the entire season through 3 weeks and hasn't even come close in combined points. So it'll be interesting. There's a little bit more hope this week, possibly. I don't want to sound optimistic because I'm not, but there is a glimmer, a shining gold star of hope, possibly, that coming off that tough Auburn loss, they could be a little bit distracted and still kind of looking back / looking forward.
Yeah, and Will, this game this game should be the kind of crazy roller coaster that the season has kind of been, the epitome of this season. It's in Nashville, afternoon kick. Ole Miss, as we mentioned, 16.5-point favorite. But Vegas has to be confident in Vanderbilt. The over-under is 64. And we talked about it with Jake. I think you got to hammer this under because I don't see Vanderbilt scoring. I mean, I don't even know if I see them scoring 10 points, Will. Like this offense is just not – they have not lived up to real – I mean, there wasn't any hype to live up to. But if you're Ken Seals, this is your opportunity that you've been looking for this year. You've got a susceptible Ole Miss defense. And taking a look at the stats, Will, their defense has just been atrocious. I mean, they gave up 63 to Alabama. They gave up 41 to Kentucky, 51 to Florida. And they played a little bit better against Arkansas, still gave up 33, and then they gave up 35 last week at Auburn. So it's not looking good for the Ole Miss defense. But if you're Ken Seals, you have to cash in on Saturday. You have to.
Yeah, the thing is, I've been optimistic going into the season. I was less optimistic after the Texas A&M game. I had some optimism because they looked improved. They looked better. They looked like there was some young talent on the roster. And I'm kind of to the point after the last 2 weeks that I'm like, all right, what have you shown me lately? What have you shown me in the last 2 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
And the last 2 weeks have been abysmal. Ken Seals has been okay. The only thing that I am really looking forward to is Keon Brooks looked really, really good last week. If there was a bright spot, he looked like clearly the back that had the most explosive ability, the most playmaking ability. I believe he had 13 carries for 72 yards.
Mm-hmm.
That's just going off memory, so that might be incorrect, but somewhere around there.
Yeah, right around there.
So I'm looking for an expanded role for him, since he does have 2 weeks now that he's had off to prepare for this, as well as a full game week the previous week before South Carolina. So I'm looking for him. Cam Johnson and Amir Abdur-Rahman have to get open. They have to make plays. And then Ken Seals, they have to take some shots down the field against an offense like Ole Miss. Ken Seals was 17 for 24. For, I believe, 148 yards and a touchdown, 24 pass attempts, 148 yards, completing at a pretty decent rate. So that's obviously the Vanderbilt offense is not looking down the field for big plays. And even when they're looking short, those receivers are not making plays when given the opportunity. And that's just not going to cut it against an Ole Miss offense that is producing how they are.
Yeah, and the screen passes will. I mean, I don't think, as we talked about it, the screen pass, there hasn't been a single screen pass that has worked at all. And you saw even last year with how bad that offense was, they were still finding a way to get the ball to Keyshawn in the flat and just throw him a screen and put him in space. Now, that could be on the O-line this year. That could be on play calling. It could be on the timing. It could be on Ken Seals. I'm not going to put the blame on anyone, but for Vanderbilt's offense to have some kind of semblance of momentum against Ole Miss, they have to get the screen game going, because that has been a part of Vanderbilt's offensive identity the past 3-4 years, under Andy Ludwig and even under Jerry Godowski. And now, with Todd Fitch coming in, he's been incorporating a lot of stuff, but he has not been able to incorporate the screen game. He's been trying to, but nothing has worked. So, number one, the screen game, you got to incorporate that. And if you're the O-line, you got to try to give Ken a little bit more time. It's tough. We talked about you got a D lineman on the O-line right now, and it's just not the recipe necessarily for providing time for your quarterback. And you talked about it, Will. We saw Cam Johnson with a touchdown against South Carolina. That cut it to 17-7. And if you're Cam, it's tough on a receiver. It was tough on Kalijah last year. But I'm looking for the chemistry with Ken and Cam to improve and kind of have that deep shot opportunity that you talked about and expose that susceptible defense. So we talked about it offensively, Will, but defensively, where's the hope? Where's the confidence? Is there any confidence that this offense can be contained? Because you mentioned Ole Miss put up nearly 50 points against Alabama.
Yeah, Donovan Kaufman coming back. He was on the COVID list against South Carolina is huge. Dimitri Moore, and Dio Dangbo are clearly our three best defensive players. One at obviously that linebacker position, one on the defensive line, and one at safety in the secondary. So those three guys have to play like stars. They have to play like those are the guys, because the rest of the defense is lackluster. They have some names on there that I feel like should be performing better than they are. Giving up 41 points to South Carolina, 41 points to LSU. I'm looking for more of a concerted effort, just flying to the ball. Kind of the tackling wasn't great against Texas A&M. They had some unforced turnovers that made the defense look better than it actually played. But the energy out there on the defensive side of the ball was tremendously better against Texas A&M. And a lot of that's momentum. And I don't know what the energy is around that program right now, but I can imagine it's extremely high and extremely positive, because, when it rains, it pours. Because not only have we had these bad losses, you also had possibly the best recruit of the last 4 years for Derek Mason decommit. in Jack Beck, who was a 4-star receiver. And I mean, with the offers he's receiving and the performances he put up his junior season and senior season,
not a shocker.
You might be looking at moving closer to that 5-star top 10 receivers in the country, just based on his film and how he's kind of skyrocketed. So the feeling around that program can't be great. There hasn't really been any news about Derek Mason's job. That's been dead silence, radio silence. So if they were going to make a move at any point this season, that was the time last week when they did not have the players. That game was, or 2 weeks ago when that game was canceled or rescheduled against Missouri. You had the bye week. That was the time to make the move. Have 2 weeks to transition Todd Fitch into that head coaching interim position, and they didn't make a move. So you will not see Derek Mason moved during this season. And in my opinion, based on everything, I really, really doubt that you're going to see Derek Mason. I really do think you're going to see Derek Mason on the sideline in 2021.
Will Healy, are you available on line one? I'm trying to reach Will Healy, because that's who we want right now. And Will, that was a little bit scary to hear. I got to admit. I'm not. This is a whole nother conversation, but I'm not surprised that not only that opinion has been held and that's likely to happen. So I mean that's kind of where we're at right now. But a little bit of positivity. We got some new gold jerseys. Will, I know we tweeted out. I don't even know if they're gold. It looked a little cream, like kind of like the baseball jerseys. I like it. I think it's a clean look. The shoulders are still with the black with the anchor on there. So
I will never say that I like a uniform when they still have those stupid shoulder caps on them.
You don't like those?
Vanderbilt looks like they are stuck in 2008 with their shoulder caps on every single new uniform design they have. The rest of the uniform design looks great. Their new helmets look great. Their actual jersey design, I love it.
Damn shoulder caps.
But if you know me or have talked to me at all, the shoulder caps are my pet peeve, and they are on every single uniform that we have.
Of Will, but they do have the degree, the city, the SEC back there on the collar, so that's a decent touch. But so yeah, they'll be rocking the gold against Ole Miss on Saturday, and we'll see what kind of performance. You mentioned Jack Beck decommitting. Danny Clark will not be available on Saturday as he has left the team as well. So just to close it out here, we'll get to predictions in a second, but Coach Mason said he's excited for football this week against Ole Miss. He said, we're going to play this game. Let's tee it up. So they're ready. And we'll see what kind of effort Vanderbilt comes with against Ole Miss. It's time for predictions. We will hear Jake Evans, the Ole Miss beat writer from the Rebel Walks predictions a little bit later in the podcast. But right now, William Byram, your prediction time for Vanderbilt-Ole Miss. The line is 16.5, over under 64. Vegas betting odds and your prediction. Go.
So before I get directly into the prediction, I just want to plug an article from Jackson Talk, the pros and cons of keeping or firing Derek Mason. That is probably the best Vanderbilt article on any site that I've read. I might be a little biased of actually breaking down the situation from a neutral perspective and just looking at the pros and cons. So check that out. We'll tweet that out again. But part of me sees this game, the offense improving, but I keep saying that. I don't think that we're going to be able to slow down Ole Miss's attack whatsoever. I do think Vanderbilt will have its first 2-touchdown game of the season, so that's a positive. But I'm seeing this game as a 45-14 victory for the Rebels. I don't see Ole Miss scoring less than 40. We've given up 41 to South Carolina, 41 to LSU.
That's getting close to the over-under.
Yeah, they do have turnover issues. I believe they threw 6 interceptions in a game, and we talked about that, and you'll hear that later in the podcast. But 45-14, I think that once again you'll see Vanderbilt play closer in the first half, seeing kind of a 1-2 score game going into halftime. Okay. You're like, we just got to turn around at half, and then halftime adjustments once again for Derek Mason will be piss poor. And we will come out and get obliterated because Lane Kiffin is simply a better coach than Derek Mason.
The Lane train keeps rolling, says Will Byram. So there it is, 48-14 from Willie. Oh, no. Don't do it to us, Will. Will, don't do it to us.
There we go.
Will, put Will Healy. I'm just going to start calling you Will Healy. And I'm going to change your last name so I can keep dreaming about that potential. But there you have it. Will Byram, 48-14.
45-14. Give the defense a little
45. Okay, we're going to stick with the under, as we said, hammer the under. Will, we talked about the glimmer of hope, the shining star glimmer of hope in this game. And if there's any time to be somewhat confident in Vanderbilt, it's now. And I'm not saying that like they're going to win this game, but they have 2 weeks to prepare for a horrible, god-awful Ole Miss defense. This defense is horrible. And so if you're Ken Seals, Todd Fitch, and these receivers, the O-line, these last 2 weeks, you had to have been in the room saying, here's what we're doing. First drive, here's our first 15 scripted plays. Let's go out there, do what we can.
Yeah, Billy, I think they've really been hammering in those first and second down runs and third down sacks. I think they've really been going over those. Sorry, I'll be more positive the rest of the podcast here.
Come on, Negative Nelly. But on to the prediction, though, here. For Vanderbilt, I'm not going to talk about the keys. I'm gonna get right to the score. I think Ole Miss is going to put up a lot of points. The over/under is iffy. I like that 45-48 range. I'm going to go ahead and make it 42 instead of 45. 42-17. I think Ole Miss scores a late touchdown, puts it way out of reach, and Vanderbilt is kind of lost, and that's kind of how they've been all season. And we will wait and see what kind of performance we have. So Vanderbilt, I think, loses to Ole Miss 42-17. Will's got 45-14. So there it is, the over-under 64. I think we'll see. I might have to go to FanDuel and hammer that under and give me some points, Will, because I don't think Ole Miss – I mean, the only way they get that is if Ole Miss scores nearly 60. You know, I don't think Vanderbilt's – like you said, you could score 2 touchdowns. But there you have it. That's the prediction segment. For Will Byram, myself, Billy Derrick, you've been listening to the first segment of the Door Report. Coming right up is Jake Evans from the Rebel Walk and the Flagship Football Show. We are now happy to be joined by Jake Evans. He is the host of the Flagship Football Show. He is a senior writer for the Rebel Walk down there in Oxford. And Mr. Jake Evans is set to graduate from Ole Miss next year in 2021. You can follow him on Twitter at JimmyMan23. Jimmy, what's been going on, man?
How are you, Billy? I'm hanging in there. You know, things are kind of bleak in Oxford a little bit. Hopefully the Rebs we were thinking they might have a couple more wins on the schedule at this point, but you know, it is what it is. It's SEC football. How about you?
Hey, yeah, it's been awesome down. I'm down here in Naples. Will Byram, my co-host, is up in Nashville. So we've been surviving as much as we can. Vanderbilt hasn't played in a couple weeks, so that could be to their advantage Saturday night in Nashville. The Commodores are 16.5-point underdogs, and we'll get Mr. Jake Evans' prediction a little bit later. But Jake, I want to start with kind of the big game, you know, ability, of Lane Kiffin being able to battle in there in big games, especially against Alabama early in the season. You saw that tight game, but in particular with this one, to try to get to that second win mark, how important is this game for him and the Rebs?
Well, you know, the thing is that this game right here is absolutely crucial. You know, moving into the season, like I said, we expected Ole Miss to hopefully have at least a second win by this point. And so the thing is we're kind of in a weird spot right now where, you know, we're in year one of a rebuild. This is a rebuild, make no mistake about it. And so, you know, the timetable is stretched out a little bit further. However, with how quickly he hit the ground running and how much production he showed right off the bat with this offense, yeah, he kind of raised his own bar, and he kind of did himself a disservice because any missteps after that, it frustrates Ole Miss fans because we say, hey, we were just able to compete with Alabama for 57.5 minutes. Why did we just go to Arkansas and you know, throw 6 interceptions? So, you know, it's an up and down roller coaster ride, and it's so frustrating as a fan because, you know, we're sold on what Lane Kiffin's got. We are very excited about what he's got with this program, and you know, it's almost kind of a luxury that we already get to be upset with the play of this team because, like I said, we were expecting this to be a 3, maybe 4-year rebuild before Ole Miss was really ready to compete. And so the fact that we're already able to be frustrated at the play of the team, it's a good thing. Obviously, you don't want to be frustrated, but I think where the position we're in right now, given the time frame, we're already very pleased with where we're at.
Oh, I mean, you guys should, because looking at the schedule, Jake, obviously it's been shootout city with Lane Kiffin. They lost the opening game 51-35 against Florida. They won an overtime thriller against Kentucky by 1 point, 42-41. And then they put up 48 on Bama. They lost a close one again. You mentioned that Arkansas game. That's kind of a head scratcher. Arkansas is not to be slept on, but again, that's a game they should win. And then last week against Auburn, the tough call. We're going to ask you about it here, Jake, but if you're Lane Kiffin and kind of the drama, the roller coaster ride that he's kind of put Ole Miss fans on this year has been crazy. Here's how it went down. On Monday, the SEC fined Lane Kiffin $25,000 for complaining about officiating. And going back to the game on Saturday, the officials missed what looked like an Auburn turnover on a fourth quarter Ole Miss kickoff when Sean Shivers touched the ball before Ole Miss players recovered it in the end zone. And I was watching that, Jake, and I know, with you being there at Ole Miss, and that's tough. Being Vandy fans, we relate, and that's kind of been the Ole Miss Vandy connection. The tough calls, man. So with that in mind, what's the reaction around Oxford with that, and are you surprised by any of Kiffin's antics surrounding that?
Well, the thing is, Oxford as a whole, the Ole Miss fan base, community, everything as a whole, we know that we got the short end of the straw there. We know that, there's a lot of times when as fans you go, that call blew the game or that call blew the game or whatever. But when it comes down to it, a play like that was so critical, that right there, Ole Miss lands on that ball, we got a tie game in the fourth quarter. But instead Auburn, they take possession and game over. Ole Miss doesn't get a chance. A play like that, it just kills you as a fan because when you see it on the video, it's so clearly there. When you slow it down, you can clearly tell it. And officials have made calls on things with way less evidence. And so something like that, it drives you crazy because you go, that shouldn't happen in 2020. That they should not be able to do that with how many cameras are on the field, with how they're supposed to be reviewing plays, almost every play anyway. Things like that shouldn't happen. And so, obviously, again, it's incredibly frustrating. But I think Kiffin's response was perfect. And this was kind of the first time we got a chance to really see his personality on display because he's been very, very quiet the first couple months, or I guess the first 10 months on the job. He's not as loud as he used to be. He's not as off the wall. You can tell that when he speaks, he thinks about what he says before he speaks because he knows his track record and he knows that people are waiting on him to, give him that soundbite. And so I think his response was perfect because if you think about the situation, I don't think he's in the wrong there. Basically, the way that situation plays out is the SEC says, hey, you're fined $25,000 for pointing out the fact that we screwed up. They admitted that they missed the call. And the thing that was also so frustrating about that in the press release that they gave, about 130-ish words of it were about the blown call and about 270 words were about Lane Kiffin running his mouth on social media. So it's frustrating because as Ole Miss fans, we felt for the last decade that we kind of have a target on our back through various NCAA investigations and things like that. And so this almost just seems like another kick where you're just thinking, why are we getting fined? They admitted that they messed up. Why is he getting fined for pointing out the call? And so, it's frustrating, but we kind of like to see it because Ole Miss hasn't had a coach that's been willing to step out and say something that the majority of coaches wouldn't say. That was not something we ever got with Matt Luke, and that's something that we love because the players know that Lane Kiffin's going to ride or die for him. That right there is if you're a player and you see your coach willing to stick his neck out there and say, I'll take $25,000, I'll pay it in pennies. Screw y'all. This is my team. We love it. And so, going into this week, we hope that energy keeps building. Considering how heartbreaking that loss was last week, we're excited for this week, and I think the energy is going up and up as the week goes on.
Yeah, I think I know where you land on this topic, what we were discussing before, and kind of how you've talked about it a little bit before, and the tough call on that law or on that non-call, I guess you can say that resulted in the loss to Auburn. But so I'm guessing you're still on the Lane train. But what's the general feeling around the Ole Miss fan base about Lane Kiffin?
Well, the Ole Miss is in a new era of football. Ole Miss is right now, what we've got with Lane Kiffin is something that we haven't had in a long time. Ole Miss, as Mississippi people like to call it, Ole Miss has had a string of good old boy coaches in a row where Matt Luke gets hired. He's the exactly the good old boy. Matt Luke was the O-line coach. He's a Mississippi guy. He played at Ole Miss, things like that. None of that's bad. If he's the best candidate for the job, that's awesome. However, for a string of hires in a row, Ole Miss seemed to, and not necessarily just the head coach, they'd bring in the good old boy type of people, the people with connections and things like that. He's my
friend. And
Right. And one of the things, that's great for centralizing the Mississippi identity because there's a lot of good talent that is in and around Mississippi. But the thing that causes a big problem with is your national persona. And that's something that Lane Kiffin has already stressed is that, hey, we love Mississippi. We're proud of Mississippi. We're the flagship school in the state of Mississippi. But we're not just recruiting Mississippi players. We play teams from other states. And so we're going to go be a national brand. We're going to try and pull guys out of New York. We're going to get somebody from California. We want to go down to Texas and to Florida, things like that, to where, like I said, we're in a new era. This is not the traditional Ole Miss that I've grown up knowing my whole life. Lane Kiffin is now trying to take them back to the national brand that Hugh Freeze kind of started back in 2013 when he signed, Laquan Treadwell, Robert Kimbichi, that whole class, Laramie Tunsil. So he's kind of moving back towards that national, Ole Miss being a national brand and not just a collection of good old boys hanging out in Knoxville, Mississippi. So we really, really like the direction he's going. He's also, he seems to just have a better grasp of how to run a football team than we've had in the last few years. Ole Miss with DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, that whole slew of receivers, offense was not a problem, but we could not stop anyone on defense to save our life. And so it's better, and we've kind of got a situation similar to that this year. But our defense has shown progress. Our offense has shown progress. Obviously, it's hills and valleys and a roller coaster for both. But they both seem to be playing more at an SEC level consistently than we've seen in years past. So we like the direction he's going. We think he's got a much more modern, analytic-based, type of approach to the game. And me personally, that's something I like. I like the fact that they're diving in further. I like that they're diving into the game more than saying, hey, we're going to run it on 4th and 1 because they're tired. I'd rather him say, we're running it on 4th and 1 because we know that 78% of the time we're going to get at least a yard and a half. Mm-hmm. That appeals more to me because I think the whole, like I said, just kind of the gut feeling. I don't think that works anymore. And I think that that's what separates good coaches from great coaches is a gut feeling versus backing it up with something that you can actually prove. And so Kiffin is more geared towards the analytical approach, which I like personally. And I think that that's going to help Ole Miss continue to, like I said, grow to a national brand and move out of the good old boy stage.
Yeah. You talked about roller coasters, hills and valleys for the Ole Miss offense and defense. It feels more like over here at Vanderbilt, we're kind of on a complete just downward slide, starting out the year with Texas A&M, playing them down to the wire, looking like there's going to be a lot of improvement and then just plummeting straight downhill. But Ole Miss's defense has struggled, even though the offense has put up some pretty remarkable numbers against some really talented teams. But this Vanderbilt offense has yet to put up 270 total yards in a game. So what specifically on that defense or what area are you looking to see improvement this Saturday?
Well, the thing was last week Ole Miss was hit with some COVID problems. So Ole Miss was missing 3 defensive starters as is. So the defense was banged up isn't the right word because there's a lot of depth in that defense. But there's also a lot of youth in that defense. It's not inexperience because these are young guys who Ole Miss has had a slew of injuries last year on their defense. And so a lot of freshmen and sophomores were forced to play. So there's a lot of youth, but that youth translates more toward experience than inexperience. And so, we like what we got. We got guys in the scheme that can play well, that have played well before. It's just that it's not all meshing right now. We see flashes of it. And Ole Miss goes to Arkansas and manages to stay in the game, even though we turned the ball over 7 times. We managed to stay in that game until the 6th turnover happened. And so that right there is a credit to the defense. So like we talked about, the defense has gone up and down. Ole Miss is expecting to see all those 3 defensive starters who were out last week. We're expecting all of them back this week. And so, Ole Miss's biggest thing that they're going to have to do this year. Yeah, exactly. The biggest thing Ole Miss is going to have to do this week is that they're going to have to get a pass rush. That's where all their problems have started. And the linebacking group is the deepest that they have on the field, but they haven't been able to use that to help generate a pass rush. And so Ole Miss has been in a lot of situations where they're sitting back and their DBs have to cover guys for 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds. And you can't win football games like that. Even the best cornerback is going to eventually lose his man if he's got to cover him for half an hour. So if they're not able to generate that pass rush, Vanderbilt will have a chance to sit back and kind of pick them apart. It hasn't been that difficult this year to pick Ole Miss apart. And so, it's going to be interesting because Vanderbilt's offense is not very good. Ole Miss's defense is not very good. Somebody's got to break.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to have it. Somebody's going to have
If I had to guess, I would say Ole Miss is going to see a vast improvement on defensive production with our defensive linemen, our defensive tackle playing right guard or left. I think it's right guard, and 4 of our starting offensive linemen opting out. So I would expect a pretty decent improvement in Ole Miss's pass rush production. But Billy, I think we're going to shift over to the game this Saturday.
Yeah, so, with the game, I love this Ole Miss Vandy. I wouldn't say it's a rivalry, but I like the history. I think for me, it starts back in, and for you too, Will, probably 2013. And that just electric start to the season on a Thursday night. And then you had a couple years ago where Vandy eked out a close one. Last year, Ole Miss obviously handed it to Vandy. So this is a different year. You can kind of throw a lot of those past games out the window, mainly because of the way Vanderbilt's been playing. But for Ole Miss, Jake, how do you think they're approaching this one? Obviously, with Lane Kiffin, each game has been different, and each – it's kind of been, you never know what you're going to get. You talked about the hills and valleys, but for this game Saturday night and Lane Kiffin and his offense, do you think you could see some wrinkles on offense, or you think it's going to kind of be let's impose our will and let's try to just step on Vandy's throats?
As much as I wish it was the latter, I think we're going to see a lot of wrinkles. Like you talked about, Ole Miss, Vandy, I'd consider it a rivalry at this point because Ole Miss and Vandy, at least the way I remember,
same level.
Yeah. Ole Miss and Vandy always played up or down to the competition. Whichever team is better that year, they don't have any clear advantage. They'll still come in, and that game will be a slugfest for no good reason. And so, I'd consider it a rivalry, honestly. As annoying as it is, I'd consider it a rivalry. Yeah. But, one of the things that I heard this morning was that apparently Kiffin is a little bit worried about this week. Apparently that's what I said too. Apparently the focus has been not 100% on Vanderbilt. I think, and I don't think that's to say that Ole Miss is just simply going, Vanderbilt is awful, we're going to beat them no matter what. I don't think that that's what it is. I think that there's been more focus this week on the end of Auburn last week. There's been more focus on Kiffin and the pennies and the fines and officials and things like that, to where I think the focus is it's not where people are overlooking Vanderbilt. They just haven't quite moved over to the Vanderbilt game yet, which is a problem since it's in 48 hours. But I think that the first couple of days of this week, players and the team and everybody kind of got drug along by all the officials and all the complaining about that. But, I hope that was a little bit of an overstatement. I hope that was maybe his way of kind of sending a wake-up call out to the team or something like that, because that absolutely scares me to death. The fact that Ole Miss might not be ready for Vanderbilt scares me to death.
I don't think you have a ton to be worried about there.
Yeah, especially Vanderbilt with 2 weeks to prepare, even though Ole Miss does do a lot on offense. So kind of moving to some specific guys, we talked about the defense needing to improve the pass rush. That's what you wanted to see out of them. But who are a couple key guys on offense that Vanderbilt fans might not know about that will be key on Saturday? And who are a couple key individual players on defense as well to keep an eye on?
Well, when it comes to offense, there's no secret. There's no hidden players. There's no, better watch out for this guy. He didn't do anything last week, but he might this week. There's none of that. Ole Miss gives the ball to Elijah Moore 10 to 12 times a game. They hand the ball off between Snoop Connor and Jerry Neely. Each of them probably touches the ball around 12 or 14 times a game. They've both been running the ball well. Elijah Moore is on pace to break Ole Miss's single-season reception record in 10 games, not 12.
Man.
One of the things that I love about Kiffin is that he has made it no secret that we're going to get the ball to our playmakers. We're not going to try and dance around and get them open by giving them less touches and things like that. He doesn't play any games with that. He just says our best players will get the ball. We're going to find ways to give them the ball. And so that works well. And it also hurts Ole Miss in a way. It works well because naturally you got the ball and the best players on the team. That's what Ole Miss needs. We're not as talented as every team that we're going to face this year, but we can be faster. And we can just be better at getting the ball in our best threats' hands. And so it works well from that end. But the one side of it that doesn't work quite well is that teams can know what's coming. In big situations, fourth downs, long third downs, times when Ole Miss needs to move the ball, it sometimes comes back to bite them because everybody knows Elijah Moore is going to get the ball. The ball is going to, they're going to, try and run a bubble screen of some sorts. They're going to get him open. They're going to try and get him coming across the middle. People are able to see what Ole Miss does with the ball consistently. And that was one of the things that was one of the reasons Arkansas was able to beat Ole Miss, was that they figured out that if you drop 8 against Ole Miss and you make Matt Corral pick tiny little windows out, it's probably not going to happen. And more times than not, you're going to have a guy in the window waiting for that ball. That's what they were able to do. They picked him off 6 times. Auburn ran a sense of that. They kind of ran a version of that defense for the first half of last week. And Ole Miss ran the ball and made them, eventually load the box back up. And so I'd expect Vanderbilt to play some kind of a hybrid of that defense where they're, dropping guys into coverage to make Corral hit tight windows, but then they also bring it up so that Ole Miss can't just run them up and down the field all day long. So, on offense, those are the guys. It's no secret. It's Corral throwing the ball to Elijah Moore and running the ball with Jerry Neely and Snoop Connor. As we look at defense, though, a couple of the guys that are absolutely crucial for Ole Miss. One of them is Ryder Anderson. Ryder Anderson, he's about 100 feet tall. He's like 310 pounds, and he can fly. The dude is one of the biggest humans I've ever seen.
Was he created on NCAA football?
It looks like it. It looks like what you create your My Player as. Realistically, I think he's actually about 6'7", but yeah, still enormous. But yeah, so he's on the defensive line for the Rebels. He's had a good season this year. He's a big, long, strong guy. He's able to manipulate tackles with his long reach. He's able to get free. He's done a really good job the last couple of weeks, kind of helping establish that pass rush that I talked about. Behind him, Momo Sonogo is a guy. Momo has been with the Rebs for a couple of years now. I think missed 10 games last season, broke his ankle in week 3 last year. Back. Momo's back. Momo is a freshman, made 115 tackles as a middle linebacker for the Rebels. The guy can play. He's a leader on this defense. He has been the leader on the defense. And so the two guys right there, they're the two that we're looking for the most. We need Ryder Anderson to help establish the pass rush. We need Momo to help with that too. But we also got to have Momo is the heart and soul of that defense. And since we're in a new scheme this year, it's uber crucial that your middle linebacker is on the same page with everybody, communicating calls, things like that. And so he's going to be the key every single week. He is the cog in this defense that makes it work. And somebody with experience like him playing big-time SEC football, it's going to be him every week. He's going to be the guy that we got to watch for every week.
Before we wrap it up with your prediction, Jake, you two got to find a way to sneak into this game. You'll both be in Nashville. We got to find a way to get y'all in the game somehow.
I tell you what, I like I told y'all before we got on the air, I did not realize Vanderbilt still didn't have fans yet. I don't really know how much it would help since there's only – 40,000 seats in that stadium.
You'd be the only Ole Miss guy in there.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. I've always Vanderbilt Stadium. Even growing up in Nashville, it's weird. I never really went to Vanderbilt Stadium very often. I never saw too many Vandy games, but I'd love to go this week.
Yeah, it throws me back to the 2013 Ole Miss Vandy game. I don't think we can expect something like that, but we'll see. Will and I will give our predictions in the other segment, but Jake, it's time now for yours. We got a 16.5-point favorite for the Rebs on the road. I don't think it really matters where this game is. It'll probably help them a lot more if it was in Oxford. I don't think it's a true advantage for Vanderbilt at all. I don't think anyone will say that. They'll have maybe a few students there. But for you, Jake, what's your prediction? Do you think Ole Miss covers in this one?
I think Ole Miss covers. I think that, when you look at this game, I think that regardless of how good and bad regardless of how bad Ole Miss's defense is and how good how bad Vandy's offense is also, can't say that. Regardless of that, this game is just going to come down to whether or not Ole Miss can move the ball. one of the things after Ole Miss played Alabama a couple of weeks ago, when we looked at the rest of that schedule, we thought there's not a single team on this schedule that should be able to outscore us. There's better teams on our schedule. There's teams with much better defenses, much better offenses, things like that. But realistically, we think that we can outscore everybody on our schedule. And I think that that's what Ole Miss's brand of football is going to come down to for the most part. The rest of the season is they're just going to have to find ways to outscore people. They move the ball quickly. Like I said earlier, they get the ball into their playmakers' hands. And Ole Miss is kind of on the same track where a few years ago, they had a lot of scoring drives that were 4 plays, 75 yards, 49 seconds. Things like that. So they move the ball well. They can score at will. But there's also, like we talked about, there's some kinks in this offense. They've had some trouble the last couple of weeks. After Alabama, I'd have said that Ole Miss is winning this game by 50. After the last 2 weeks,
I agree.
I'm not so sure. I still think Ole Miss wins and covers, but I don't think Ole Miss is going to run away with this game. I think that the way that this game most likely plays out, unfortunately, I think Ole Miss will turn it over a couple of times. I think that Vandy,
Jake, you don't have to be generous.
No, seriously. Like I was talking about earlier, I will never underestimate Vanderbilt again in my lifetime. I've done it too many times, and they've come back to nip at our heels too many times. And so I'm going to give them the respect. I'm not going to be the reason that we fall short. All right. I'm going to cover my bases here.
We're not going to be blaming Jake after this.
Yeah. It's not my fault. Nobody look at me. I think that Ole Miss is going to have a couple of kinks in their offense. I think that like I talked about, the teams dropping 8 and making them throw into tight windows, and then also turning around and stacking the box. I think that Ole Miss has to find a way to be able to not just operate in those two looks. And that's where they've been, that's been their main game the last couple of weeks, is playing against that 8 DB look and then playing against a stacked box. And so they've got to find a way to get themselves in situations where they're not looking at those fronts. They got to do a better job of, I guess, maybe disguising play calls, I guess, of not being as transparent on offense. And hopefully that's something that we work more towards this week, because like we said earlier, the secret's out. People know how to stop Ole Miss. Arkansas did it. Auburn did it. The word is out. So, I think that Vandy's going to play into that. I think it'll cause some problems for Ole Miss. I think that, like I said, I think Ole Miss will turn it over a couple times. But I think as this game goes on, I think Ole Miss, they're able to run the ball better than Vandy's able to stop the run. And I think that that's just going to end up doing it for them. Honestly, I don't expect a big passing week out of Corral. I expect Ole Miss to just slowly chip away in the run game. They've got Jerry Neely and Snoop Connor, who are probably one of the better, 1-2 punches at running back in the SEC. I think that they're going to try and use that to slowly chip away, because you don't need anything flashy to beat Vanderbilt. You don't need trick plays. You don't need, whatever. You just need to run you need to move the ball. You need to not turn it over. Penalties, things like that. You're not trying to beat Nick Saban. Yeah. You don't have to draw up the craziest game plan that's ever been.
You just got to simplify it.
You simplify it. That's right. Yep. This week, Ole Miss has made so many mistakes the last couple of weeks. The way they win this game is they simplify it. They do what they're good at. They do what they know how to do. And they just try and win this game this week and then look forward, after that.
Yep.
Just win this game this week.
Here we go. Put you on the spot. Ole Miss.
Here we go.
Vanderbilt points. Let's hear it.
Oh man, from the Vegas man himself.
Here we go.
So I saw I think what's over under 64 in this game. So
under. Hammer.
I would hammer the under, absolutely. I think
unless Ole Miss scores 60.
Right.
Ole Miss can score 50 points, that under is still going to hit.
But I don't think Vandy's going to score anything. So that's why.
No.
That's why
if that game reaches 64, it's going to be because Ole Miss scored 50 of them.
Yeah.
I think something around probably 38-14, 38-17, something like that. I think Vandy will find a way to get a couple of touchdowns. I think that, Ole Miss's defense is just too bad to shut them out.
I mean, Vandy has
I don't think
with 13 points. That's a bold statement.
I think it's going to happen. When you look at it, I mean, Ole Miss is before the Arkansas game, Ole Miss's defense was on pace to be the worst statistical defense in the history of college football. So Vandy, no exaggeration.
Just two very bad defenses going at it.
It is. That's all there is to it.
Worst tackling team in all of FBS football through a couple weeks. So we got some high quality defense.
I think Montgomery Bell Academy could run all over this Vandy defense.
It wouldn't surprise me. You know, the thing is both of these defenses, the way that I think about it, both of these defenses, they're just Band-Aids over a gunshot wound.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're exactly right. And there's too many holes to plug in that Vandy boat, right? Well, so we got Ole Miss Vandy coming up, 3:00 kick in Nashville, 4 Eastern time, anywhere else on the east side. So there's a prediction. We got 38-17 from Mr. Jake Evans. So he's banking on that. Yeah, and we're advising you guys to hammer the under there. So Vanderbilt-Ole Miss in Nashville. Jake, it was a pleasure, man. Thanks for checking in, buddy.
Billy, Will, thanks for having me, guys.
Yes, sir. You got it, man. All right, you've been listening to the Door Report presented by Alaco Hardwood Flooring.